Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on The Story Within, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. My son remembered my birthday 3 days late and asked why I hadn't reminded him. I read the text twice in the afternoon light of my kitchen, where the kettle had just clicked off and the chocolate cake on the counter was a day past soft. Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry work's crazy. Next time, nudge me. Nudge me as if I were a calendar notification wearing pearls. My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 68, and for years I have financed the weather inside other people's homes. When my husband Henry died 5 springs ago, he left enough for comfort, not spectacle. I stayed in our quiet place on West End Avenue. My son Simon and his wife Clara bought a steep-roofed colonial in the suburbs and filled it with white sofas, renovation dust, and opinions about countertops. I visited most Sundays with soup in a thermos and left with a lighter wallet. The arrangement had a tone I would pay, and gratitude would be implied, like tip included. This year I baked the cake. Henry loved the one with dark cocoa and a sly line of espresso, because it's also the cake Simon loved at 5, and some habits are muscle memory. My wrists ached stirring the batter. I made a mess of the counter and felt absurdly cheerful. The morning of my birthday, I sent a simple message. Cake's ready whenever you are. The dots pulsed, then stopped. I moved through the day like a woman expecting a doorbell. Evening fell. No car. Night fell. No call. Day 2, the frosting dulled to a matte shrug. Day 3, I cut a slice for breakfast out of Defiance, ate 2 bites and put the plate in the sink, face down like a small burial. I slid the rest into the freezer and then took it out again, because what was the point of saving something whose job was to be shared? When I finally washed the pan, I spoke out loud there and startled myself. On the 4th morning, the message landed. Happy birthday, Mom. The bubble arrived with that weightless tone people adopt when they assume forgiveness is the default setting. You should have reminded me. I stood with my hand on the back of the chair until the room steadied. The street below resumed its traffic choreography. A dog complained at a hydrant. The kettle finished hours ago sat like a punctuation mark. The old Evelyn would have typed, "Don't be silly, darling. It happens." The old Evelyn might have offered dinner to make it easier to ignore being ignored. But something had changed in the dead space between a softening cake and a glib apology. I put my phone down, opened the drawer with the yellow folders, and took out the one labeled Hart Family Trust Distributions. Inside, printouts of transfers notes in my small, neat hand, the map of a system I had mistaken for love. I dialed Harold Stein, our attorney for 15 years. "Evelyn," he said, that court-soft baritone that always makes you think of mahogany and clocks. "How can I help?" "I'd like to suspend the monthly disbursements to Simon's household," I said. "Immediately." There was a pause long enough to qualify as respect. "May I ask what prompted the change?" "Clarity," I said, and surprised myself with the steadiness of it. By late afternoon, the automation was unwired. Mortgage, utilities, the card Claire prefers for boutiques with clanging chandeliers. All of it disconnected as cleanly as a lamp from a wall. I did not send a memo. I did not explain. For years, they had taken without asking how the tap worked. I was under no obligation to teach plumbing. I made tea and sat in Henry's old reading chair, the one with the small rip at the seam I never fixed because it felt like an honest detail. The city's winter light angled toward the river. I read 10 pages of a novel and retained 3. The quiet came in like a tide and lingered instead of withdrawing. The first call from Simon came 6 days later at 10 in the morning. I was matching socks, an errand that makes time obey. I let it ring out. The second call landed while I was rinsing lettuce. The third during the news. By the 4th, I was smiling in a way I did not admire. Private vindicated a little theatrical. I set the phone face down on the counter as if it had asked to see the ceiling. A text followed, brisk and baffled. "Mom, call me ASAP. Bank glitch." Mortgage bounced. The phrase bank glitch had the innocence of a toddler pointing at a broken vase. I poured myself water in a wine glass and sat back down. The 5th call came with Clara's name. I watched it flash across the screen and go dark. The phone began to populate a new column: voicemails. The first was cordial. The 7th was worried. The 12th had that particular rasp panic lens to decency. By bedtime, there had been 23 calls from Simon, 6 from Clara, and more messages than anyone needs to prove a point. The last voicemail arrived at 11:41 p.m., and I listened to it standing by the window, looking out at the skeletal trees and the cabs tessellating down Broadway. "Mom," Simon said, tired down to the bone. "I know I messed up the birthday. I'm sorry. But this isn't funny. We need that money." That sentence did for me what a translation does for a text you thought you understood. Not, "We miss you," not, "Are you all right?" not, "Can we talk?" Just, we need that money, which is to say we need you to remain a function. I turned off the phone, folded the dish towel into thirds, and went to bed. Sleep arrived like a friend who knows where the spare key is. In the morning, someone pounded on my door at 7:32. New York knows how to knock. This was suburban urgency trying on the city. I did not rush. I put on a soft blue sweater and my pearl studs. I brushed my hair in the hallway mirror and thought absurdly of my mother, who met trouble with lipstick because it made her sit up straighter. I opened the door with the chain on. Simon looked older around the eyes, which happens when you meet the truth in unflattering light. Claire's mouth was thin with something that wasn't grief. He spoke first, stepping toward the chain as if proximity were an argument. "Mom, what's going on?" "The bank says transfer stopped. The house payment bounced, the car payment bounced, Claire's cards." He glanced at her, then away. "It's all blocked." I unhooked the chain and stepped back so they could enter if they insisted. They did, because insisting is a skill money teaches. "Coffee?" I asked, because I'm not an animal. "We don't want coffee," Clara said, standing ramrod in the foyer, clutching a bag big enough to smuggle a dog. "We want to know why you cut off our money with no warning." "Our money?" The phrase reached for a chair and pulled it out under itself. I made the coffee anyway, measured, poured, waited while the machine made its small private thunder. I put 2 cups on the table and sat. "I didn't cut off your money," I said. "I stopped my transfers." "Mom," Simon said, sitting opposite me like a boy about to be told about consequences, "if this is about your birthday." "It is not small enough to be about a birthday," I said. "It is about arithmetic and respect." Clara let out a laugh that thought it was a cough. "This is ridiculous." "Possibly," I said, "but here we are." I opened the yellow folder and took out the pages I had prepared not for their benefit but for mine. "Since your father died," I said, keeping my voice in the neutral register I reserve for recipes and weather, "I have transferred to your household $847,000 in direct support. That does not include gifts or vacations or the down payment, just the monthly hydraulics that keep your life bright." Clara's face paled slightly like a screen dimming to conserve power. "In that time," I went on, "you both of you have visited me 32 times. There have been 43 calls explicitly for money. There have been 7 calls to ask how I am when money was not the next noun. I placed the list on the table as if it were a placemat." "Mom," Simon said softly, and there was the boy who once wrote me a note in block letters. "I are sorry," and handed me the pencil to fix it for him. "We can do better. We just need—" "You need money," I said. "And you may need to live within the shape of your earnings." Clara folded her arms. "You can't just abandon your family because your feelings are hurt." I looked at her, at the precision of the manicure, the dress that called itself oatmeal and cost a mortgage payment. "I am not abandoning anyone," I said. "I am declining to fund contempt." Silence settled with excellent posture. The radiator hissed, the city did its mid-morning clatter 2 stories down, and a gull made a sound like a hinge. "Here is what will happen today," I said at last, and even I was surprised at the lack of tremor. "The transfers remain suspended. The next conversation we have will be on a day when you call to ask about me and mean it." I stood the small theater of ending a scene. "You may have coffee to go. The cups are in the cabinet." Clara stared at me in a way that tried to pin me to an old script. It didn't hold. Simon stood too quickly and knocked his knee against the table, the small pain you get when a habit hits the edge of a new fact. At the door he turned, opened his mouth, closed it. The hallway swallowed their footsteps. I carried the 2 untouched cups to the sink and poured them out. The coffee made dark circles in the basin like eclipses that decided not to finish. My hands shook for exactly 5 seconds and then remembered what hands are for. The phone buzzed on the counter, another message. "Mom. Please just call me. We can sort this out." I let the buzz finish its sentence. I picked up a pen and wrote my name on an envelope just to feel the line of it. Evelyn centered, even legible. The room held steady. The day opened like an ordinary door. I woke to winter light cutting a quiet triangle across the floor and the faint ache you get after a conversation that didn't ask permission to be hard. The apartment kept its promises. The radiator sang. The hallway smelled faintly of someone else's toast. The river glassed itself beyond the buildings as if to model what calm looks like. The phone flashed on the counter patient as a dog by the door. Overnight, a stack of messages had arranged themselves into columns, missed calls, texts, 1 email with the subject line, "Please." I made coffee before I touched any of it. I buttered a slice of sourdough so thin the butter turned luminous, and ate standing up like a person waiting on weather. Simon first, because he had been first for so long. "Mom, can we talk? I'm outside after court at noon. I can come by." Then a second, trying another door. "I'll bring lunch. Your favorite from Miro, a 3rd smaller, please." Clara's arrived like notices. "This is unnecessary. The kids are confused. We deserve an explanation." I put the phone down and set 2 placemats on the table, an old reflex I corrected by putting one away. The kettle clicked off with excellent timing. At 12:15 the buzzer sounded. I let it ring once, then pressed. Simon stepped in with the gust from the stairwell, hair damp from a snow that hadn't committed to being snow yet, hands occupied with a paper bag that declared itself Mediterranean handmade daily. "Hi, Mom." He tried a smile that knew its own weight. "Hi," I said, and the word was a chair we could both sit on. He unpacked lunch as if we were reenacting a ritual that might remind both of us how to behave. Chickpea salad. Lamb skewers. A triangle of baklava collapsed gently in buttered paper. He moved carefully as if sudden gestures might trigger an alarm. We ate first because food is a way to keep a room from choosing sides too quickly. He told me a small story about a client whose dog had broken loose in front of the courthouse and been recaptured by a bailiff with surprising agility. I told him I'd finally found a shoe repair that could rescue a pair Henry had worn to shreds and then refused to throw away on principle and perhaps on superstition. The baklava stuck to my teeth like a polite insistence. When the plates were mostly empty, Simon leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees, the way he did when he was a boy, concentrating on Lego instructions. "Mom," he said and looked at the floor, "I handled this badly." "Yes, I'm sorry about the birthday." He said it the way a person touches a bruise to assess how deep blue goes. "And I'm sorry I made it your job to make me remember you." The sentence changed the temperature of the room a half degree. He went on words slower now. "The money." He paused, catching himself adjusting. "The transfers, we built our budget around them. I shouldn't have." "We shouldn't have. That's on me. But the timing, mortgage, tuition, everything, I panicked." "You said we need that money." I said not to scald him, just so both of us would have to hear it in the air. He rubbed his forehead, a gesture that never cured the headache. "I did." He looked at me with that raw, middle-aged boyness that makes mothers pick up objects and put them down again just to avoid reaching across every distance and saying, "All right then." I sat back in my chair until the urge passed. I brought something I said and slid the folder across the table. Inside, I'd placed a page that looked like a ledger but read like a clear window amounts. Dates the word purpose in a neat column that did not list love or habit but reached for more accurate nouns: mortgage, tuition, repairs, groceries. Then a second page: visits, calls, reasons. The math was plain in a way even grief can respect. He read the first page fast and the second slowly, the way we all read news that concerns the person we think we are. "This isn't flattering," he managed, attempting a thin smile and dropping it. "It's not meant to be," I said. "It's meant to be accurate." He nodded and set the papers down with two fingertips as if they were hot. "What do you want from me?" he asked, and it was almost sweet, the directness. It suggested a world in which requests are simple, out loud, and honored. 30 days, I said. He blinked. "Of what?" "Of behaving as if I am your mother, not your institution. Call because you're thinking of me, not because a bill is due. Ask about my day and be able to tolerate the answer. Invite me to dinner and manage to look at me longer than you look at your phone or your home project list. Remember a date without hinting. Speak to me when I arrive and when I leave in a voice that would pass for affection if you recorded it and played it back. That's..." He searched for a word and chose honesty. "That's fair." Then the lawyer in him added, "How will I know if I'm doing it right?" "You won't," I said. "You'll have to risk the not knowing that love asks for." He took that in, looked at the window as if the river might have posted instructions, and then nodded once, almost imperceptible. And then, "There is no then today," I said, and he understood that the sentence was also a mercy. "We're eating baklava, and we're both capable of speaking in complete thoughts. That's the extent." He exhaled, a little undone by the simplicity of the terms. When he stood to go, he looked unsure of what to do with his hands, so he folded the paper bag around itself as if precision could fix a day. At the door, he said, "I'll call," and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the small, helpless effort to meet him halfway. He walked to the elevator with his shoulders squared against a weather he had helped make. After he left, the apartment returned to itself fast, as places without children learn to do. I washed the dishes and put the ledger back in his yellow sleeve. I opened a window and let a gust in that smelled like snow and subway heat. The phone vibrated across the table with Claire's name. I considered answering, then didn't. Another text followed: "We need to meet. Today." I poured more coffee and allowed the silence to have its way with the room. Claire arrived without being invited, which was on brand. She wore a coat that swung like a bell and a face that suggested the bell would not ring for just anyone. I let her in because my mother raised me to be hospitable in war and peace. "I'll be brief," she said, removing gloves finger by finger and laying them down like rules. "This is punitive." "Forward," I said. "That's a new direction." She didn't flinch. "You've put us in a position where we could lose the house. The kids will be uprooted. Do you understand we have obligations?" "You have a salary," I said. "You also have 2 cars, a lawn service, a contractor you keep all winter busy, inventing summer and a fondness for a store that believes pants should cost what braces do. She smiled without warmth. So this is about envy. It's about arithmetic, I said, and returned her smile with one that had more history in it. She drew herself taller. Fine. Conditions. Everyone seems to be speaking in conditions. Name them. I repeated what I'd told Simon, minus the tone that made it easier to swallow. She listened with an actor's stillness honed performative, and when I finished, she said, "So you want us to perform affection? I want you to practice it until your muscles remember," I said. "If that reads as performance from where you're standing, that's information." Something in her eyes flickered contempt or calculation. It's hard to spot the molecular difference at first glance. 30 days, she said. "We'll see you at dinner Friday. The children miss you." "Do they?" I asked a question without a landing place. She put her gloves back on like a person sheathed for cold and walked out. In the hall, the elevator dinged so politely it made me laugh. The week began to collect gestures. On Tuesday, a florist I did not know brought an arrangement so large I had to move the fruit bowl to make room. White roses. A tall branch of lilies with 3 blooms not yet opened, the promise of scent deferred. The card said, "Thinking of you, C and S." I set the flowers on the dining table because beauty isn't guilty. The motive attached to it can be. An hour later, Claire's call arrived, precisely on cue. "Did they come?" "They did. I thought you deserved something special." "They are indisputably something." A beat of airless laughter. "Maybe we could go out this weekend, Nails." "We never do that." "We never have," I agreed. "I'll think about it." On Wednesday, the phone rang and Emma's name glowed on the screen for the first time, not attached to a family thread. My granddaughter speaks in brisk sentences and edits herself as she goes, a habit I respect. "Hi, Grandma," she said, chipper enough to stand upright on its own. "Just calling to tell you about school." "Tell me," I said and sat, because listening deserves chairs. She offered a report card of a day history quiz, lunchroom politics, a friend's haircut, a coach with a whistle for a personality. Her voice warmed when she forgot to perform, cooled when she remembered. At the end, she said, as if reading it off the bottom of a screen, "I love you very much." "I love you," I said. "You can call me to complain about buses and algebra any time you like." She laughed herself unguarded, and then someone in the background said her name in a way that tried to herd the moment back into a pen. We said goodbye like people do when they mean to mean it. On Thursday, a letter arrived addressed in Jake's careful 4th draft handwriting. "Dear Grandma," it began, "I have been thinking about how awesome you are." The sentence made me smile the way you smile at a magician who palms the coin with your permission. He listed 3 things we might do together: museum, pizza, aquarium, then underlined "love" Jake hard enough to tattoo the paper. I put the letter in the bowl with the keys so I would see it every time I left the apartment and every time I came home. That afternoon, Simon called and asked if we could have coffee on Saturday, just us. He said the words "just us" like a luxury item he wasn't sure he could afford. We settled on 10. He added, "I'll bring the kids by Sunday if you're free." I told him I'd be here. This is where I live. The days organized themselves around small, specific things. I took a scarf to be re-hemmed by a woman who has watched me grow older without comment. I returned a library book one day early, not out of virtue, but because the prose had moved with such clean gravity, I wanted to put it back on a shelf where someone else could be trusted by it. I walked to the park and sat on a cold bench, just long enough to remember what trees do with winter. By evening, the phone glowed with a manageable light. The messages had softened in tone even when they sharpened in choreography. "How are you feeling today, Mom? Thinking of you. Dinner Friday. We'll cook your favorite." If there was a script, at least they were reading from the draft that used respect nouns instead of business verbs. I slept well, which felt like an achievement and also like a thing that should never have required courage. In the morning, the apartment smelled faintly of lilies, which are patient about opening and do not consult anyone about timing. I poured coffee, stood at the window, watched the river carry the city's reflections downstream, and let my breath match its unargumentative pace. Friday came dressed like itself. I set the vase of roses on the radiator cover where the warmth convinced them to loosen their shoulders. I chose a black dress that fit without conversation and a scarf Henry had bought in a shop so narrow the proprietor had to step outside to let us turn around. When Simon's number appeared with "We're ready when you are," I put on my coat, locked the door, and stepped into a hallway that smelled of old wood and somebody's cinnamon. Down on the street, the air had that metallic edge that pretends to be weather and is actually the city reminding you it owns your ears. I hailed a cab the old way, using a hand, and told the driver a suburb, and watched the buildings thin. I carried with me the clean, unglamorous fact of a boundary spoken and the quieter fact of a heart that, to its surprise, was still capable of expanding exactly where it had contracted. I rang their bell and heard behind the door chairs move, a child's voice in the wrong register for real excitement, Clara saying, All right, in a tone that wanted to audition as warmth. Simon opened, and the smell of roasted something greeted me like a host who had learned the first step of an art and hoped to keep up. Mom, he said, and the word didn't ask for anything. It only pointed for once to me. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon oil and something roasted. Claire's voice floated from the kitchen, bright-pitched, then lowered when she saw me. "Evelyn, you look beautiful," she said, guiding me in with a hand that didn't touch my arm. Candles made halos on the table. The good china stood at attention. A linen runner divided the room like a ceasefire. Emma and Jake appeared in a choreographed rush. Grandma Emma said, landing a hug that had sincerity at the edges and effort in the middle. Jake produced a place card written in his careful capital letters, "Grandma," as if I might forget. "We made your favorite," Simon said, too quickly, lifting a lid to show a braise that had worked itself into tenderness. The smell was persuasive. He pulled out my chair as though he had been practicing. We ate like people auditioning for an advertisement about family. Questions arrived on time. "How are you sleeping? Are you warm enough in the apartment? Did you ever fix that rip in the chair?" I answered without embellishment and watched the room watch me. Clara laughed at my small stories, touching her necklace each time as if it were a bell she could ring for charm. Every few minutes she glanced toward the sideboard where her phone lay face down like a trained pet. Halfway through, Emma leaned toward me. "We're reading a separate piece," she said. "I think it's less about friendship and more about weather. Inside people." The sentence startled me with its accuracy. "Tell me more," I said, and for 30 seconds we were just grandmother and granddaughter, no stage lights. Then Clara placed a hand on Emma's shoulder, light proprietary, and the moment folded itself and sat down. After dinner, Claire produced a cake I had not taught her to bake, high-shouldered, glossy, overconfident with sugar flowers. "Make a wish," she said, pressing a box of long matches into Simon's hand. I didn't close my eyes when the room dimmed. You shouldn't wish in the dark if your wish is simply for light. The four of them sang a version of the song that left the word dear out, which is sometimes the only honest way to sing it. We moved to the living room. The twins showed me a puzzle they'd done together, which meant Emma had ordered the sky while Jake hunted edges like treasure. Simon asked about the building's boiler. Clara praised a scarf I'd worn last winter and hadn't brought tonight. The conversation steered itself toward safe harbors. When it drifted toward money, Simon tugged it back with both hands and set it down like a vase. I stayed an hour past politeness and 1 minute beyond that. On my way out, Emma walked me to the threshold. "You smell like cinnamon," she said, embarrassed by the tenderness of it. "It's the apartment," I said. "It bakes memories after 6 p.m. She laughed in a way that belonged to her, not to the script. The ride home was the city humming under its breath. I held the puzzle piece picture of their faces and let it rearrange itself until it looked less staged. On my table waited the white roses from earlier in the week, now slightly blown their scent, leaning toward the lush end of honesty. I filled a glass with water, topped off the vase, and set both down where the lamplight made a small pool. The next afternoon, Marjorie Levin called. We have known each other since Henry discovered in 1988 that both our husbands mispronounced the same Bordeaux and pretended not to care. "Eve," she said, "are you free to see actual human beings and drink unsupervised coffee?" We met at a gallery cafe where the paintings cost more than truth and the cappuccinos came with foam that thought it was architecture. She touched my wrist the way old friends do. "You look like yourself," she said, which is a more generous blessing than most. She kept the niceties short. I ran into Clara at the club, she said, rearranging her saucer into alignment with its cup. She had a small audience and a large tone. The gist was that you've been erratic since Henry died, making unwise financial choices, and that Simon may have to step in for your sake. There were nods. I gave no nods. The sentence arrived like an envelope whose weight predicted its contents. Did she use the word evaluation, I asked. Marjorie lifted an eyebrow. She did not. She said ICCESS, which is its cousin who shows up with a casserole. The cappuccino cooled while the air warmed inside my ribs. I took a breath that felt like stepping onto a moving walkway. "Thank you for telling me." "I didn't tell you to make you angry," she said. "I told you because a rumor is a seed with hooves. It travels." I went home through a winter light that turned even scaffolding beautiful. The apartment had done its daily transformation: morning, plausible afternoon, practical evening, a little forgiving. I put my coat on his hook, stood a moment, and called Harold Stein. He picked up on the second ring. "Evelyn, has anyone called you recently?" I asked to inquire about the legal standard for determining whether an older woman is competent to handle her affairs. The silence was not empty, it was working. "Evelyn, that's not a casual question. I'm not asking casually." He sighed the way people do when the word ethics holds hands with the word friendship. "Simon called last week," he said. He framed it as concern. I told him your file is not his to interpret. I reminded him the court presumes capacity unless proven otherwise, and that in your case, capacity is visible every time you open your mouth. Thank you, I said, and leaned against the counter. Because counters do the job, chairs can't when news makes your knees vote no. I also told him Harold said that any attempt to maneuver around you rather than speak to you would make me uncooperative to the point of sculpture. We spoke briefly about weather as a way to touch ground. When we hung up, the white roses looked less like a gesture and more like a prop. I took the small card from between the stems. Thinking of ICCESS, and set it beside Jake's letter so the two could keep each other honest. Evening went about its reliable business. I made an omelet with chives and ate it at the counter because a table is sometimes too ceremonial. I washed the plate immediately, a habit Henry referred to as Evelyn erasing evidence. The phone hummed on the shelf. Emma. I found the metaphor I was looking for. Weather isn't inside people, people are inside systems of weather. Me, brilliant. Umbrellas optional. A small human exchange inside a larger rehearsal. At 9:30, Simon texted, "Love you, Mom." It felt like someone had typed the words from memory rather than from feeling, and still to my irritation, the words did their small primitive work. I put the phone face down not to reject it, but to let it cool. I slept in pieces and lace, the kind of sleep that stitches itself together by morning and pretends it was whole all along. When I woke, the lilies in the arrangement had opened 3 white trumpets declaring a parade the room had not planned. The scent was confident, almost ceremonial. I opened a window and balanced it with a sweater. Around noon, I met Marjorie again, this time for a walk that did not require judgments about art. She asked one question with her eyes. I answered by telling her what Harold had said and what she had confirmed. We walked in step past a row of brownstones that have been clapping politely for a century. "You're steady," she said. "I am. Good." Back home, I took out a box Henry had labeled documents that matter in his thick, unfancy pen. Inside, tucked under tax returns and guarantees nobody ever redeems, was a note he'd written me on the kind of paper hotels provide when you intend to pretend you write letters on vacation. If you ever feel surrounded, it read, "Remember that paper is a wall when you need one. Build it straight. H." I set the note against the lamp. The room made a kind of sense around it. Late afternoon brought a bouquet of apology texts. "We loved having you last night. You looked radiant." The kids were thrilled. I answered each with the truth at its smallest dose. "Thank you for dinner. Good to see everyone." I did not provide warmth I did not have to spare. At 5, the doorbell rang. A courier handed me a gift bag with a store name that prefers whispers to shouts. Inside, a silk scarf the color of coins and a card in Clara's slanted script. For my favorite mother-in-law, it set a category in which I am both the only entrant and the unseated champion. I folded the scarf back into its tissue. It sighed like yes. I set it on the shelf beside the lilies. Beauty isn't an argument, it's an element. I poured tea and sat at the small desk under the window where the light stays late. Then, with Henry's note like a keel, I opened a fresh pad of paper and began to write, not speeches, not explanations, just the names of things and the dates that gave them shape. Numbers behave better when they see their friends. The apartment settled into evening. Radiator, street light, a neighbor's laugh traveling the length of a corridor. I kept writing until the page contained only facts, and the room had no room left for rumor. When the kettle clicked off again, I stood, poured, and watched the steam braid itself into the cold air as if making a case it didn't need to make. Outside, a thin snow began confetti, for no occasion a quieting. I moved the roses to the sill to drink the colder light and put Jake's letter where I would pass it on my way to the door. The phone was where I had left it, patient face down. I turned it over and typed a single message to Harold. "I'd like to come by your office tomorrow. Morning is best." Then I put the pen on the pad, placed my hand flat on the paper as if to steady a small boat, and sat very still while the apartment breathed in time with me. Morning opened like a file, clean, pale, all margins. I dressed for cold that had opinions, black wool, dress, low heels that knew their purpose, and walked to Harold's office through air that made conversation visible. The receptionist with the perfect bun greeted me by name and set a glass of water on a coaster that read, "Do the hard thing neatly." Harold rose when I stepped in. He had the look of a man who arranges evidence in his sleep. "Evelyn," he said, and gestured to the chair that always makes clients feel smarter by an inch. "I'd like 2 things," I said. "A formal cognitive evaluation by someone so reputable even gossip will curtsy, and clarity on paper about how the down payment to Simon and Clara's house was recorded." "The evaluation is simple," he said. "I'll call Dr. Lynn at Columbia Neuropsych, gold standard." As for the house, he slid a folder across the desk. "You and Henry were careful. The down payment was executed as a loan secured by a deed of trust interest modest term long. They signed. I recorded it. They have benefited from you forgetting how prudent you were." "I didn't forget," I said. "I was outnumbered by my own kindness." We set the appointment. We arranged a messenger for copies. We spoke the kind of language paper understands, dates, venues, notaries, the elegance of a seal. After lunch at a diner that still believes in ceramic mugs, I called a woman whose name lived in the back of my mind like a safety pin Asha Menon licensed investigator recommended years ago when Henry had needed someone to confirm a partner's immaculate lies. She answered on the second ring, voice low and practical. I explained enough for her to weigh the situation without inheriting my anger. "I'll run a quick net," she said. "Credit pulls, liens, new accounts, counsel consulted. If there's smoke, we'll find fire. You won't have to guess." 2 days later, I sat in a bright room at Columbia tracing lines between shapes while a clock did what it does without asking. Dr. Lynn had a face you'd believe in a storm, attentive, exact. She asked me to remember 5 words and draw a clock and tell her what connected a trumpet, a mailbox, and thunder. By the end, my brain felt like a muscle that had been used properly. "You're fine," she said, not kindly, not unkindly the way a surgeon says benign. "Better than fine. I'll write you a letter that reads like a bell." She did. It landed in my inbox the next morning with the kind of authority rumor cannot digest. Asha's report arrived that afternoon. She came in person, set a slim binder on my table, and poured herself the water I had already poured her. "No preface," she said, and turned pages. Accounts I didn't know existed but belonged to them both. A second mortgage taken last spring. Revolving balances that revolved like carnival rides. A separate short-lived account where large transfers from an elder support line item landed and left again in 24 hours, as if scrubbing their footprints. And in the last section, a list of consultations with an elder law specialist on Lexington, 3 meetings, in 6 months, the notes anonymized, the pattern not. "Enough," she asked. "More than I said. Thank you." She left me with receipts, not feelings. I put the binder beside Dr. Lynn's letter and Harold's documents and sat still until stillness became the thing I was sitting on, not something I was waiting for. I called Simon that evening. "Dinner tomorrow," I said. "All of us. Please." His relief pricked through the phone like heat from a cracked oven. "Yes, thank you. Mom, thank you." Friday brought a sky that couldn't decide which gray to be. I carried a small handbag and no explanations. When Simon opened the door, he looked thinner around the mouth, as if gnawing on contingency plans had its own calories. The table was set with care. Emma had tucked sprigs of rosemary into the napkin rings. Jake had folded the place cards into improbable cranes. The roast for once was the right color all the way through. We got through the meal without stepping on the floorboards that groaned. I asked Jake about a science project. He explained osmosis like a beat poet. I asked Emma about the book. She said no one in it knew how to tell the truth on the first try. Clara complimented my earrings and didn't look at her phone once. Simon kept offering bread as if bread were an apology. When plates had made it to the sideboard and coffee steamed in cups heavy enough to count as anchors, I stood. "I have a few things," I said, and placed 3 envelopes on the table, white, manila blue. Clara's smile moved, then stalled. Simon sat straighter. I opened the white envelope. "This is from Dr. Lynn, Columbia Neuropsych. Full cognitive assessment administered this week. Findings: intact attention, memory, executive function. No deficits, no concerns, clear as glass." I slid the letter toward them so the hospital letterhead could do its calm work. I opened the manila envelope. "These are copies of the documents Harold recorded when you bought this house. A promissory note and deed of trust. The down payment from me was not a gift. It was a loan secured by this property to prevent precisely the kind of confusion we are now correcting." I tapped the page where their signatures sat as if waiting for them to catch up. I was generous. I was not careless. I opened the blue envelope. This is a summary from an investigator. It documents a second mortgage, multiple revolving debts, a temporary account used to move money I transferred before paying routine bills and consultations with an elder law attorney regarding guardianship. I'm not asking you what you meant. I am telling you what you did. The room altered the way rooms do when the truth is a new person standing there. The children looked from face to face, young enough to want to believe that adults will now sort it out and call them back when the air has changed. Clara spoke first. She reached for her poise and found it made of paper. "You are overreacting." The attorney was informational. "We love you. We were worried." The word we had so much work to do, it whimpered. "Informational?" I asked. "The rumor at your club used the word assessed. Harold's phone used the word competency. My phone used the word mother when you needed a down payment and bank when you didn't want to say it out loud." Emma put a hand on Jake's sleeve. He didn't shrug it off. Simon made a sound like a hinge that hadn't been oiled. "Mom," he said quietly, "I am ashamed." He looked at his hands as if they'd been caught stealing from a pocket he hadn't realized was his. I nodded once, a grant, not a pardon. "Here's where we are." I lifted the manila documents. Payments under the loan resume next month per the note. If you miss them, Harold files what the law allows. No surprises, no threats, just paper doing what paper does. I set the blue envelope on top. As of now, no more transfers beyond what the note requires. None. If you attempt to portray me as incompetent, predatory, unstable, or otherwise in need of management, I will ask Harold to act in the way he has advised me is appropriate. I will not argue about it in rooms that smell like flowers. Clara found Steele quickly the skill of a certain kind of fear. You can't cut your grandchildren out of their home, she said, voice dropping to the register used for ultimatums and prayers. I can, I said, and I am not. I am giving their parents the exact tools they need to keep it. Jobs, budgets, honesty. I looked at Emma and Jake, let my voice change shape. You are not collateral. You are why I will not let this lie go on. Simon put his face in his hands for a moment, then looked up. I've told myself a story about duty and gratitude and how money is just another way to say love. And then at some point I decided the love was implied and the money was owed. He swallowed hard and met my eyes. I am sorry. Not for being caught. For how long I let it be. I set a fourth thing on the table, a simple letter printed on good paper. I revised my will this afternoon, I said. Specific bequests aside, the residuary estate goes to a foundation Henry and I named for my mother. Scholarships housing medical debt relief. Your names are not in that paragraph. I didn't say the number. It didn't need saying to be loud. Claire's mouth opened, then closed like a fish no longer willing to trust water. Emma looked at me with a complicated face it had taken her 14 years to assemble. Are you still my grandmother? She asked as if there were a law that could change it. Yes, I said, and felt the truth of it bloom without my permission. Jake exhaled a small ancient sound of relief. I put my hand on the back of a chair, the way people lean on ordinary objects when they're tired of performing strength. I will not stay for dessert, I said. Thank you for dinner. I kissed Emma's hair and touched Jake's shoulder and nodded at Simon and did not nod at Clara. At the door, Simon said Mom, and I turned. He didn't speak. He just held the look, and I recognized the part of him that knew how to hold on to a new shape until it set. The air outside had changed. Snow gathered itself into the idea of snow. In the cab, the city gave back its small consolations, the hawker folding his table with grace, a dog insisting the walk continue, two teenagers arguing sincerely about a song as if history depended on it. When the car crossed the park, the trees stood up in their black winter lace as though stitched to the sky. At home, I hung my coat next to Henry's old rain jacket, which I never managed to donate and no longer plan to. The apartment greeted me with its ordinary orchestra radiator breath, a neighbor's faucet, announcing existence, the elevator's distant throat clearing. I set the blue manila and white envelopes on the desk, aligned their corners, and slid them into a drawer labeled Keep. On the table, the lilies had moved from declarative to generous. Their scent reached without asking permission and was for once welcome. I opened the window 2 inches and let the room choose its own balance. Then I poured tea and stood by the glass, watching the river discover how to be a mirror at night. The phone lit with a message from Emma. I'm sorry for the grown-ups. I like your earrings. Also, we learned today that the word please used to mean, if it pleases you, which I think is nicer than how we use it now. I typed, you are a person I'm pleased to know. Sleep well. A minute later, I will. Jake says goodnight. He found a word problem he likes. A photo followed pencil scratches, a scribbled answer, Jake's proud initials. I laughed out loud, a small clean sound that left the air improved. I turned off the lamps one by one and let the apartment shrink to its best proportions. At the sink, I washed the cup and set it on the towel to dry, not erasing evidence this time, so much as making sure the morning would find the kitchen in agreement with itself. I checked the lock, the stove, the window, the quiet. In the bedroom, I lifted the lid of the old cedar box on my dresser and touched the letter Henry had written on hotel paper. If you ever feel surrounded, remember that paper is a wall when you need one. Build it straight. I put it back and closed the lid with the gentle authority that Wood likes. When I lay down, the sheets felt like a well-edited page. No flourishes, nothing unnecessary, everything legible. Outside, the city kept being itself without asking me to finance it. Inside, the air held the exact amount of perfume a room earns when flowers open on their own time. I slept. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.